That would be 20% back to taxpayers, 20% to pay down the debt. 60% is left. Who gets that?
When you achieve savings, you can either return it to taxpayers, you can return it to our debtors, or it can be cycled into next year's budget, and then it just lowers the overall baseline for next year. This is all going to be worked on through the reconciliation process with Congress that's going underway right now.
The White House breaking down how government savings will be used. Now, DOGE is proposing that a percentage should go straight to Americans' pockets. And James Fishback is a DOGE advisor. He came up with this idea. That escalated quickly, James. So here was Elon Musk yesterday talking to Hannity about this. Watch.
The overall goal is to try to get $1 trillion out of the deficit. And if the deficit is not brought under control, America will go bankrupt. The massive waste, fraud, and abuse that has been going on, which is leading to a $2 trillion a year deficit. That's what the president was handed on Jan 20th, a $2 trillion deficit. It's insane.
James, sorry, that was on Tuesday, not last night. But the sentiment continues. And a question based on, even on what Stephen Miller was just explaining to Peter Doocy yesterday, the $55 billion in savings that DOGE has found so far, has that money then been transferred back to the Treasury, or is it still at those agencies waiting some sort of assignment from either the president or actually from Congress?
Well, it's somewhere in the ether, Dana, but I think the more important question is that where is this money going to go when we end up saving it when DOGE is all said and done? President Trump is off to a smashing start. What an incredible first month. Now it's time to look at the DOGE savings, as our proposal calls out, and send 20% of that right back to the hardworking Americans who sent it to D.C. in the first place, Dana. They didn't send it to Washington, D.C. for it to be spent on a rocky Sesame Street or on a transgender opera in Colombia. They sent it for our roads, our bridges, our health care, and our education. That clearly has been lacking. So guess what? Taxpayers are overdue for restitution. They need a refund. And I'm proud that President Trump supports our proposal.
So would, in your idea, and maybe it's not fully fleshed out yet, but would the dividend checks go to people, like all taxpayers, or just to people making a certain amount of money?
It's a great question. So the plan, everyone can read it at mydogedividend.com. The plan is very simple, Dana. We think DOGE will save $2 trillion in total. You take 20% of that, that's $400 billion. You divide that by the number of American households that will pay federal income tax this year. That's 79 million. That gets you $5,000 to every American tax-paying household next summer. It'll have President Trump's signature on it, because without him, without his leadership, this would not be possible.
Okay, the New York Times asked this, a DOGE dividend. President Trump floated giving taxpayers a piece of any savings that Elon Musk's cost-cutting generates, which could reignite inflation. And I'm no AI expert, but I just checked on Grok. I just asked a question. Would giving these checks possibly lead to more inflation? And Grok says yes. What do you say?
I say no, and here's why, Dana. The first reason is that our economy is in much better shape the last time stimulus checks were indiscriminately sent out by President Biden. We had a massive labor shortage, supply chain dislocations, and they were sent out to everybody, not just taxpayers. The second reason is that this money is coming from direct savings. So remember, for every $5 that DOGE saves, $1 goes back to hardworking taxpayers. And a poll from 2019 CNBC found that 70% of Americans would use this type of check to pay down debt, which is the opposite of inflationary. It's deflationary. So this is a good policy. So it's good economics.
That's going to be my last question. Do you think that if somebody does ultimately get this check, if they have credit card debt, they should use that extra money that they found, the savings, the money they weren't expecting to get back, and pay down their own debt?
Absolutely. Just like DC should get its house in order. So then should the government do the same? The government should do the same, which is why this proposal calls for the rest of the money, the other 80%, to narrow the deficit, Dana, and to pay down our national debt. But American taxpayers who have worked hard, they need a break. They need restitution. The biggest part, Dana, though, is we incentivize them to report waste, fraud, and abuse, as President Trump said on Air Force One. Report waste, fraud, and abuse, Dana, because guess what? The more DOGE saves, the bigger their DOGE dividend check is.
Stephen Miller breaking down the expected plan to distribute the funds that have been clawed back by DOGE, or at least some of them, as those DOGE dollars may soon be headed for your bank account. President Trump floating a plan that would use some of the department's savings to help pay down America's debt and have more go directly to the taxpayers. Let's bring in our panel. Former Biden White House Director Message Planning Megan Hayes and GOPAC Chairman David Avello. So here's what President Trump said about the idea of a DOGE dividend on Air Force One. Listen here.
I love it, a 20% dividend, so to speak, for the money that we're saving by going after the waste and fraud and abuse and all of the other things that are happening. We're thinking about giving 20% back to the American citizens and 20% down to pay back debt.
40%. Don't know where the other 60 goes, but as Stephen Miller was mentioning a moment ago, the three things you can do: give it back to people, use it to pay down the debt, or put it back into the general fund. Where do you think, Megan, it should go?
I mean, I think if the whole purpose of DOGE is to cut the deficit, it should go to the deficit. I think that, one, I think they're going to need to focus on their accounting. One time they said $8 billion, and it ends up being less than $8 million that was actually cut for DOGE. Also, we should look back to the Bush checks, or the Bush checks that came out, which took $100 billion to cover for people to get $300 and $600 per household. So there's a lot of money to give people money back that should be going to pay down the deficit if Trump is serious about balancing our budget.
I did a calculation yesterday that if you took the $55 billion that they've clawed back so far and you distributed it among every American, it'd be about $167 per person. To a lot of people, that's real money. But he's saying only 20%. So.
Well, but think about how many guitars you could buy, John, and have jam sessions on X in the afternoons. I mean, what we're really talking about is who should be spending this money. Should we be allowing Americans to invest it or spend it to help pay for everyday living and bring inflationary costs down? Or should we allow government and have it be the priority spenders? And what the Trump administration is saying is, let's give it back to Americans. Now, here's the key to all of this. It is also, are we going to also make sure tax increases don't come because we don't continue the tax cuts that happened in the first Trump administration? And if Congress doesn't keep those tax cuts going, every American's going to see a tax increase.
You know, when it comes to guitars, I'm like Phil Graham with guns. I got more than I need, but not as many as I want. Want to talk about the plane crashes that have been happening here and in Toronto, because Democrats are pointing the finger of blame at President Trump. Eric Swalwell talking about FAA cuts, saying this to Fox News Digital. Trump is president. President Trump is in charge of air safety. All crashes are Trump's fault, I guess, including the one in a different country. But here's what a guy who actually runs an airline said about the FAA cuts. Listen to Ed Bastian from Delta Airlines here.
After looking at all these mishaps, a lot of people are very nervous. Do these cuts affect you?
The cuts do not affect us, Gail. I understand that the cuts at this time are something that are raising questions, but the reality is there's over 50,000 people that work at the FAA, and the cuts, I understand, were 300 people, and they were in non-critical safety functions.
He runs an airline. One of his aircraft crashed in Toronto the other day. When it comes to this type of criticism, should the Dems just park it?
I just think they need to be really careful with their rhetoric. I think this is really breathless to be saying this. I don't think you can blame a plane crash on the president, whether or not he's making cuts at the FAA or not, and whether those cuts are justified or not, or they're different conversations. This is where I think Democrats need to be very careful, and I do not think you should be instilling fear into people who fly. It is a very safe way to travel, and this is one of those times where this will hit Americans, and they need to understand that their government is on the side of safety, and Democrats are not doing that by fear-mongering.
So Swalwell, who apparently throws around rhetoric without the benefit of fact-checking first, said that there's been more aircraft incidents in Trump's first month than there has been in any other presidency. Sean Duffy put this out on X. He says there's growing media narrative that there are more airplane crashes now in Trump's presidency than under Biden. This is false. Here are the facts. In Biden's first month, there were 57 aviation incidents in the U.S. compared to 35 under Trump. I mean, it's just such talk borders on irresponsible.
It's certainly they don't follow the counsel as if you have nothing good to say nothing at all. Right? They only have bad things.
Or
they
if you
only
don't
try
have the
to
facts
make up
on your
bad
side,
things.
shut
That's right.
up.
And there is no message coming, a positive message to come out of the Democratic Party right now. So they must continue the rhetoric that they are doing, which is unhelpful to them and ultimately helpful to Trump, because people look at this and say, well, that's silly. Of course the president's not responsible for an air crash that happens in Canada. Canada.
Yeah.
Time, let's bring in the media panel. Walkaway spokesperson Natalie Beisner and American Values PAC spokeswoman Caitlin Sinclair. Thank you both for coming on. Natalie, to you first. Former Democratic advisor Dan Turrentine said this. I think he gets it. Watch.
We're failing the common sense test. Rather than saying, hey, some of what they're finding, anybody in the right mind would say, we should end it. Instead, we scream about everything. And so when we find stuff that, in our opinion, probably is worthy of a discussion, the average voter says, forget it. All you do is scream no, and they're crazy.
So what he's saying is this just crying wolf again and again. Everything Trump says, they say it's terrible. They're crying wolf. And then when there may be something they've got a point on, nobody believes them.
Yeah, it would be a much better look for the Democrats to actually admit that maybe there is some bloat to cut. Maybe there is some waste to cut. What J.D. Vance was saying today, that we were paying for Afghani women to have modern art lessons in toilets. You know, I think that Democrats should be able to admit maybe we don't actually need that. It would be much more sensible for the Democrats to just be honest about this, especially because they say they're for the middle class and the working class. Come on.
Yeah.
Donald Trump announces the External Revenue Service, and his goal is very simple. His goal is to abolish the Internal Revenue Service and let all the outsiders pay. I mean, this is someone who is focused on America. Let's drive down our waste, fraud, and abuse. That's what Donald Trump wants to do. Balance our budget and cut our taxes.
We're hearing a lot about those potential tax cuts and what Congress is going to have to deal with. We're also hearing from the White House about what they want to do with the savings that these cost-cutting commissions have been working to find. President Trump even telling reporters he likes the idea of something of a dividend, something to give money back to Americans. But guys, this is still very much in the early stages, kind of just that trial balloon out there, but it'll certainly get a lot of discussion. Brian, Ainsley, and Lawrence?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to argue with cutting 6,000 people from the IRS.
No.
Good afternoon, Martha. And if President Trump has proof from his DOGE guys that there is widespread Social Security fraud, that means that there is a widespread federal financial crime happening. And so what do you do if you know that there's a crime happening? You report it. That is just what the president did a little while ago, directly to the Attorney General.
We have one person at 360, which is strange because the country is 250. So it's been there 110 years older than the country. Here, Pam, you better take a look at this. That's much better for you than for me. Now the question is, are they getting paid? Because somebody maybe is getting paid. Yeah, I have a feeling you were. I said, what a convenient thing. This is so nice.
For his part, Elon Musk is literally laughing off complaints from liberals that he's got bad intentions with data at the Treasury and Social Security departments.
I mean, listen, like if I steal some Social Security, I can finally buy nice things.
There was a very awkward moment here at the White House today. The president told the Democratic Governor Janet Mills of Maine no more federal funding for Maine if they don't comply with the new executive order on banning men from women's sports.
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor, because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
That is very unusual here at the White House, not what we are used to seeing when governors are invited guests of the president. And there's a lot of lawsuits flying around here. In fact, at that very same luncheon, the Attorney General Pam Bondi was seated at a table with the New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who she just sued